Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki, Sri Guru Parampara ki, Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Sai Gaura Premanandi. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. This is the biography of Srila Prabhupada, and this is in the 1950s. Lacking money to buy even proper clothes, Abai went through the chilly Delhi winter without a jacket. He would regularly walk to the printers to read the latest proofs of Bhakti Godhead. When the printer asked him why he was intent on producing his newspaper under such hardships, he replied, "It is my mission." He managed to pay the printer small amounts at intervals. After picking up the copies from the printer, Abai would walk around the city selling them. He would take a seat at a tea stand, and when someone sat beside him, he would ask him to please take a copy of Bhakti Godhead. Through his articles and editorials, Abai criticized the materialistic and atheistic tendencies of modern civilization. He also drew on his personal experiences. responding to the resistance, polite and impolite, that he met while selling back to Godhead, he wrote an article, "No Time, a Chronic Disease of the Common Man." His writing was never shrill, strident, or fanatical, despite his desperate poverty and the urgency of his message. He wrote expecting to find his reader prepared to hear sound philosophy and willing to accept the truth, especially when presented logically, relevantly, and authoritatively. In addition to selling back to Godhead at tea stalls and delivering copies to donors, Abai also mailed out free copies, both within India and abroad. For years, the vast audience of English-speaking readers outside India had concerned him, and he wanted to reach them. Having gathered addresses of libraries, universities, and cultural and government outlets outside India, he mailed as many back to Godhead as he could afford. He prepared a letter for his Western readers, suggesting that they should be even more receptive than his countrymen. On the home front, Abai sent copies of Back to Godhead to the President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, along with a letter warning him of the perilous fate that awaits a society conducted by the godless. Please therefore save them from the great fall down. He requested His Excellency at least to glance over the headlines of the enclosed copies of Back to Godhead and to consider granting the editor an interview. I am crying alone in the wilderness at the present moment, wrote Abai. His Excellency never replied. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narotavam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Adirayet Nashta Prayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatuttama Shloke Bhagavad Bhakti Naishtiki. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 1, The History of the Life of Ajamil, Text 40. Yamaduta Uchu Veda Pranihito Dharmo Veda Pranihito Dharmo Hi Adharmas Tad Viparyaya Yadharmas Tad Viparyaya Vedo Narayana Sakshat Vedo Narayana Sakshat Swayambhur Iti Shushruma Swayambhur Iti Shushruma Yamaduta Uchu Veda Pranihito Dharmo Yadharmas Tad Viparyaya Vedo Narayana Sakshat Swayambhur Iti Shushuma Yamaduta Uchu Veda Pranihito Dharmo Yadharmastad Viparyaya Vedo Narayana Sakshat Swayam Bhuriti Shushuma Yamaduta Uchu Veda Pranihito Dharmo Yadharmastad Viparyaya Vedo Narayana Sakshat Swayam Bhuriti Shushuma. Vaishnavis, Yamaduta Uchu, the order carriers of Yamaraj said, Veda, by the four Vedas, Sama, Yaju, Rig, and Atharva, Pranihita, prescribed, Dharma, religious principles, he, indeed, Adharma, irreligious principles, Tat Viparyaya, the opposite of that, that which is not supported by Vedic injunctions. Veda, the Vedas, books of knowledge. Narayana Sakshat, directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, being the words of Narayana. Swayambhu, self-born, self-sufficient, appearing only from the breath of Narayan and not being learned from anyone else. Iti, thus, Shushuma, we have heard. Translation. The Yamadutas replied, that which is prescribed in the Vedas constitutes dharma, the religious principles, and the opposite of that is irreligion. The Vedas are directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, and are self-born. This we have heard from Yamaraj. Please repeat. The Yamadutas replied, that which is prescribed in the Vedas constitutes dharma, the religious principles, and the opposite of that is irreligion. The Vedas are directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana, and are self-born. This we have heard from Yamaraj. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. The servants of Yamaraj replied quite properly. They did not manufacture principles of religion or irreligion. Instead, they explained what they had heard from the authority Yamaraj. Mahajana yena gata sapanta. One should follow the Mahajan, the authorized person. Yamaraj is one of the 12 authorities. Therefore, the servants of Yamaraj, the Yamadutas, replied with perfect clarity when they said, Shushuma, we have heard. The members of modern civilization manufacture defective religious principles through speculative concoction. This is not Dharma. They do not know what is Dharma and what is Adharma. Therefore, as stated in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, Dharma projitakaita votra. Dharma not supported by the Vedas is rejected from Srimad Bhagavad Dharma. Bhagavad Dharma comprises only that which is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Bhagavad Dharma is Savadhanam Parityajya Mamikam Sharanam Vraja. One must accept the authority of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrender to him and whatever he says. That is Dharma. Arjuna, for example, thinking that violence was adharma, was declining to fight, but Krishna urged him to fight. Arjuna abided by the orders of Krishna, and therefore he is actually a dharmi, because the order of Krishna is dharma. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Vedaishcha sarvayaham eva vedya. The real purpose of Veda knowledge is to know me. Only one who knows Krishna perfectly is liberated. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 4:9, Janma karma chame divyam evam yo viti tattvata chaktvadeham punaran janma naiti mameti sojana. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. One who understands Krishna and abides by his order is a candidate for returning home back to Godhead. It may be concluded that Dharma religion refers to that which is ordered in the Vedas, and Adharma irreligion refers to that which is not supported in the Vedas. Dharma is not actually manufactured by Narayan. As stated in the Vedas, Asya Mahato Bhutasya Vasitam Etad Yad Rig Veda Iti. The injunctions of Dharma emanate from the breathing of Narayan, the supreme living entity. Narayan exists eternally and breathes eternally, and therefore Dharma, the injunctions of Narayan, also exist eternally. Srila Madhvacharya, the original Acharya for those who belong to the Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, says, Vedanam pratamo vakta Haryeva yato vibhu yato vishvatmaka veda ityahu vedavadina. The transcendental words of the Vedas emanated from the mouth of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the Vedic principles should be understood to be Vaishnava principles, because Vishnu is the origin of the Vedas. The Vedas contain nothing beside the instructions of Vishnu, and one who follows the Vedic principles is a Vaishnava. The Vaishnava is not a member of a manufactured community of this material world. A Vaishnava is a real knower of the Vedas, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Vedaishcha sarvayaham eva vedya. Omagana Tamarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chukshuramlitam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master has forced up my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer respectful obeisances unto him. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasundabhayevacha Paritanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Let us offer respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who can fulfill the desires of everyone just like desire trees, and who are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So it's interesting, when we were reading Srila Prabhupada sending the Back to Godhead magazine to the leading politician in India at that time, and then he was saying that no one is promoting religious principles in society. He said he was crying in the wilderness. So Prabhupada felt that he was a lone voice representing Dharma in a very materialistic time, or at a time when a previously Vedic civilization was embracing atheism and agnosticism in the garb of civilization, or in the garb of enlightenment. Srila Prabhupada remained in many ways like alone crying in the wilderness. And even though now the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is represented by hundreds of temples throughout the world and 1 million or more members, still it's a very small percentage of the world population, the population on this planet. So we shouldn't expect to be getting praises from the leaders or from the general public. Our position in accepting the authorities of the Vedic literature and the Vedic civilization, that position is in one sense virtually unique in the world. Now there's a very different method of education which encourages persons to express their own opinions, and it actually discourages persons to abide by academic authorities in one sense. And the whole concept of modern knowledge is that knowledge develops by rejecting authority, by somehow or other discovering new levels of information by rejecting previous levels. So, when Srila Prabhupada was preaching throughout the world in the 1970s, he said there are so many universities in every city of America and Europe and all over the world. And there's far, far more universities now than there were then. But he sees none of them who are actually preaching the basic principles of education, which is the difference between the soul and the body. And that really continues to be the case today also, even though there are certain universities with departments of study of consciousness and different investigations into the nature of consciousness, but there's no actual training in that discipline. There's no science of understanding it on a practical level. There's no marriage between the theory and the practice. But the ascending method of investigation reigns supreme. Even if someone has some kind of experience of developed consciousness through some kind of paranormal ability, or perhaps through long practice of religious discipline or yogic discipline, then the universities attempt to study this with their atheistic methods, to try to understand, to try to dissect it, to try to explain it without reference to any religious authority. But just as Srila Prabhupada fought on with complete faith in his spiritual master and in the authorities the Guru Parampara and the authority of the Vedic literature, then we must also carry on in the same way. And we're assured of success. But when that success comes and how that success comes, we may not see it in our lifetime, or we may not see it in our particular preaching field in a big way. But the fact that we are surrendered to that process is very wonderful, and at least we ourselves are benefiting greatly from it. And anyone who comes into our close association, anyone who comes into the association of devotees who are very loyal to their spiritual masters and loyal to the Vedic literature, loyal to the acharyas, then those persons become connected to that powerful source of knowledge. Srila Prabhupada says that one who knows Krishna perfectly is liberated. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Janma Kama Chame Divyam Evam Yo Veti Tattvata. So this one who knows me Tattvata in truth. We can't know everything about Krishna. We can't know everything about any of Krishna's energies. They're all unlimited. And even the material energy also is unlimited and endlessly mutable, constantly changing. So knowing Krishna perfectly doesn't mean knowing everything about Krishna, but it means knowing Krishna in the perfect way by which Krishna gives us to understand him. And in this verse, here Srila Prabhupada compliments the Yamadutas by saying that the servants of Yamaraj replied quite properly. They said, Iti Shushruma, thus we have heard from authorities, thus we have heard from our authority Yamaraj. So this word Shushruma, or similar words like Shushushro and Shravanam, they appear throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's interesting if you look at all of those, look at all of the occasions in which this word, like Shushruma or similar words, are quoted, then sometimes Srila Prabhupada translates them as we have heard, and on other occasions he translates as we have surrendered, or we have served the authorities. So this hearing from spiritual authorities and serving spiritual authorities, they can't be separated. Whereas in the modern educational system, then learning something academically and putting it into practice, there's often no real connection between those two. And therefore, even though many academic teachers do have some appreciation for finer qualities and have some appreciation for the value of discipline and moral education, but because there's no incentive for them to put them into practice in their everyday lives, there's no obligation for them to teach that moral character to their students. In fact, they're actually prohibited from doing so. It would be considered to be like a breach of the students' kind of self-determination to do that. And then these two aspects of education, learning, hearing from, meditating on the instructions, and serving, then they're actually because they're separated, then the education has no real all of that energy that's put into education from like the age of 5 to 25, it's all really wasted. So by continuing this tradition of like being very loyal to the Vedic literature and to the Guru Parampara, then we're giving anyone who sees this frustrating dichotomy between academic study and development of character, one who sees that hypocrisy in modern society, and then Krishna can guide them to the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, knowing that this society is representing the Guru Parampara in that faithful way. So, hearing means hearing from authority means learning to ignore that which is not authority. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says in the 6th chapter, for one whose mind is controlled, the mind is the best of friends. For one who has failed to do so, the mind remains the greatest enemy. Actually, I read another verse from the 11th canto, where the mind is described as Bhishma, which means fearsome, terrible enemy. But in this nice pastime of when Satyaki, Krishna, and Balaram are like traveling together, and some demon comes to attack them, and at night actually, and they don't want to disturb Krishna, so both Satyaki and Balaram like attack this demon, but he because the demon the demon feeds on aggression, the demon feeds on anger, the demon feeds on like that kind of energy. So, but the demon actually becomes stronger when Balaram and Satyaki try to attack him. But then Krishna comes and he just laughs at the demon, and then the demon just shrinks in the size, and Krishna picks up the demon, puts him in his pocket, and then at the end of the night, Krishna says, "Oh, there was a bit of a noise during the night. Does anyone know what it was?" And so Satyaki and Balaram say, "Yeah, there was a terrible demon who came to attack us," and Krishna pulled him out of his pocket. He says, "Is this him here?" So, but yeah, so that story is there to help us understand that the mind, if listened to, can defeat even the most powerful person. Because Krishna is giving the living entity free will. And so, yeah, we can experience this actually. It's like, give the mind an inch and it will take a mile, and it can do that. And like with the advent of the internet, then the mind can take millions of miles in a second. The mind can actually completely overpower all of your energy, and all of your spiritual determination can just be like gobbled up by the mind if it's connected to the internet. It's a very dangerous enemy because it's basically controlled by atheistic personalities who, as well as wanting to make lots of money, are also wanting to convince themselves that they're right. They want to convince themselves that their atheistic theories and their desire to be independent and infallible and to be ultimately to be right is maintained. And because it's described by our acharyas that the greatest anatta, or the most powerful anatta, is the desire to be seen to be right. And so this is why Srila Prabhupada so much stresses following the authorities, and stresses following the authorities, and also stresses the importance of practicing the different stages of devotional service which enable us to follow authorities, not just out of fear or out of duty, but out of love. And that process takes some time, a long time. Srila Prabhupada was once asked by a disciple, is it possible for me to become a pure devotee? And Srila Prabhupada asked him how old he was. And he was about 30 years old. So Prabhupada says, you should have enough time. But he meant that it takes time, and it does take time. But this is also we've been in the modern educational system intoxicates us by the concept that we don't need a lot of time, that we can understand something almost instantaneously, and that at maximum it might take like 6 or 7 years to master any subject. But to master devotional service would normally take many lifetimes, as described in the Vedas. Bahanam janmanamante gyanavam mam prapadyate vasudevam savamiti samahatma sadulabham. After many births and deaths, one who is truly wise and surrenders unto me, knowing that I am everything. Such a person is such a great soul is very rare. So the Bhagavad Gita teaches really the essence of Vedic knowledge, but even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that it takes many births to come to the point of full surrender. So Srila Prabhupada is giving us that means to come to that point in one lifetime. And we should take association of those devotees who are making that determination to do that in one lifetime, but also understanding that it's not an easy process and that it requires constant control of the mind and constant adherence to the desire of the authorities. And it also needs regular reading of Srila Prabhupada's books, because by reading Srila Prabhupada's books and by reading his biography and reading his interactions with his disciples, we can understand that his strictness and his determination is, it's interesting, Mahatma Prabhu in a recent seminar on the lead up to Gaura Panim, every town and village seminars from the GBC SPT team, he spoke that Srila Prabhupada, in his consideration, displayed two qualities: Karuna Sindhu, he was an ocean of mercy, and Dharma Sindhu, he's an ocean of Dharma, or he's like a personification of Dharma. And it's very rare to see that in anyone. Generally, someone who's very compassionate is not really able to display that compassion and at the same time remain like extremely strict in their personal behavior and very much loyal to an ancient tradition, which may actually seem to most people to be not in the slightest bit compassionate. But Srila Prabhupada had so much faith in the Vedas and so much faith in the Guru Parampara that he understood that this was real compassion. And it's actually difficult to understand that. It actually takes many, many years of studying Srila Prabhupada's books to really understand that Srila Prabhupada's strictness and loyalty to the ancient principles of the Vedas, that they're synonymous with the ocean of mercy. But Srila Prabhupada says that we've held on to this enjoying mentality for like thousands of births, that we are the enjoyer. And we can see that, it's like, we can see that in the world, that everybody is still holding on to that concept of being the independent enjoyer. And because of holding on to that concept, then they're actually like inflicting suffering on each other in the attempt to attain that which is not attainable. It's not possible to attain freedom from being bound eternally to higher authority. And because we've lost knowledge of who that higher authority is, then persons have become bound to authorities who are not capable of leading them. The transcendental words of the Vedas emanated from the mouth of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the Vedic principles should be understood to be Vaishnava principles, because Vishnu is the origin of the Vedas. So many of the Vedic Shastras, especially the Rig, Sama, and Yajur and Atharva Vedas, they contain information which seems irrelevant to our lives. Predominantly, it's composed of different hymns and prayers to Indra and Agni and other demigods, and it's very ritualistic. It's very difficult to understand. Srila Prabhupada, he understands that being the ocean of Dharma and the ocean of compassion, he understands, and because he's like has so much, because he like was so determined to just strictly follow the orders of the Guru Parampara, then he had so much reciprocation from Krishna, that Krishna is the ocean of mercy. And therefore he understands that all of the injunctions of the Vedas are eternally relevant. They may not be relevant right now, but they must be preserved, and they mustn't be interfered with or interpreted. We are also the preserver of the whole tradition, not just the tradition for Kali Yuga, but we're the preserver of the whole tradition. So this helps us to feel empowered, not just by the recent acharyas, but whenever we're reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, we can feel connected to all of these different personalities, going back to this ancient time when this pastime of Vajramila was related. I once had the good fortune of reading the Srimad Bhagavatam from beginning to end, just the translations. It actually took 7 days. Every day we read for about 4 hours every day and chanted 32 rounds. And the two things that really struck me at the end of that experience was that this is my family history. This is the history of my family. And it was like, I felt a very strong connection to all the personalities. And also, the other thing that was extremely strong was that all of the processes of worship, all of the different prayers and yagyas and different deities, that this was like non-different from what we're doing now. It's a continuation. And that the kind of the strange society that exists now is just like a tiny little blip, a tiny little sort of anachronism in the whole history of the universe, and that history of the universe is represented by the Vedic literature. So, Divya Gyan Hriday Prakashito, my only desire is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from the spiritual master. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions or comments? Ashish Prabhu?
So somewhere during the class you mentioned like education in the age of 5 to it's like it is not at all helpful for one to take into Krishna consciousness. It is very misleading. Now I kind of got educated in this time period, and this education helps me to read Bhagavad Gita. So how like if I was not educated, how could I well be practicing Krishna consciousness? So isn't education needed to practice Krishna consciousness?
Yes, thank you for the question. Actually, if we study the history of religion, going back, then there is some agreement between the scholars of the Vedas and like historians. There is some agreement that, in Greek society, in Roman society, in Mesopotamian society, and in Indian society, there were systems of religion going back 3, 4, 5,000 years, and that those systems had two purposes. One was to give an education to the population so that they could become good instruments for the kings or the other people, the governments. And the other purpose of that education was to elevate people to a level of moral character to be able to guide society. So both elements of that education system have come down to the present day. And so they are useful, definitely. They are useful. Without them, as you say, if we didn't learn to read, then we wouldn't be able to read the Bhagavad Gita. And in Kali Yuga, we don't have sufficient intelligence to be able to understand things just by hearing them. And it's also an arrangement of, it's pleasing to our acharyas, it's pleasing to Krishna, and that we have the ability to be able to have conversations with others who are not inclined to accept the Vedas, so that we can explain to them in their language the veracity of this system of education. So, okay. Pada?
Prabhupada's faith, Prabhupada's faith in the Guru Parampara, just to, you can take on like Prime Minister of India to tell him the way he's thinking is wrong. And it's like, it's quite rare. I don't have anywhere near that amount of faith. Therefore, when it comes to engaging like with, atheists or modernly educated people, it's difficult to just like repeat the conclusions of Srimad Bhagavatam, because if my faith's not, I don't fully understand it. My faith's not all what it says. When I come into conflict with someone who's, well educated and well spoken, and it can challenge me. So, to what extent do we actually engage in? We enter into the sort of the modernly educated scientific world and then try and have a battle there, or do we just stay in our own ground and not even enter into?
Yeah, well, we need to have some good battles. So if we acknowledge that we haven't got full faith, then that means that means our consciousness and our intelligence has been corrupted by atheistic and speculative systems of knowledge. So if you've been severely wounded yourself, you need to become healthy before you can really help others. So it's not so much a battle. We're not so much fighting another system, but we're actually, we're paramedics. We're doctors. We're healing another system which has become disconnected, it's become broken. And to be able to be effective in communicating with others, then we need to at least to be able to recognize our own sickness. And that sickness is present in the ability, or in the lack of ability, to control our minds. So we read, Srila Prabhupada says, that reading Shastra, chanting the holy name, this is the medicine for curing us of the disease of sense gratification, or of impersonalism, hedonism. So, we'll be able to perceive how we should be able to perceive our health improving in our ability to be nourished by this medicine. Like an Ayurvedic doctor gives you the medicine which is actually really going to restore your health, then he has to give you instructions by which you enable your body to absorb that medicine. So the process of Vaidhi Bhakti and the morning program, is there to enable us to really benefit from the Vedic knowledge, to benefit from the holy name, to benefit from the association of devotees and the darshan of the deities, and we'll be able to perceive. Then we'll be able to perceive ourselves getting stronger, and then when we're reading Srila Prabhupada's books, we'll just have a natural desire to want to somehow or other share that with others. But even when that desire arises to share it with others, we still may have to spend a long time really thinking, how can I present this? But at least in the beginning, the first duty is to become really strong in our own conviction. I thank you very much. And it's very nice to be living in an environment where I feel that loyalty and application of Srila Prabhupada's teachings is being observed, and it's a very good environment to become strong, so that we can help others. Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Nisai Gaura Premanandi, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki,